Oh, there was no picture on the monitor, but there is now. It's fine. Welcome to The Writer's Dream, a forum where authors are able to talk about how they wrote their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. We are located on Facebook. The page is called The Writer's Dream, of all things, and we also are on YouTube. We are broadcast from LTV, where we are now recording this show. We are also on Cablevision all over the island. So please tune in to The Writer's Dream and listen to local authors talk about the wonderful world of writing and reading. Our guest today is Dr. Harris Cohen, and Dr. Harris Cohen is the author of Lessons Learned, How to Negotiate the Life You Want to Live. He is also a chiropractor. Look at my neck.
Yes.
And, and he is a cantor at Mastic Beach Hebrew Center. So welcome, Dr. Harris Cohen.
Thank you very much.
Tell us about your book.
Well, what I did was I tried to get approximately 19 to 20 stories based on certain challenges that people had taken during their lives and how they overcome them. I then added a section on goal setting and how to do that because I think the original plan of goal setting is flawed because there are certain things that cause more discomfort than they do comfort. So I put everything into a conglomeration into the book.
Okay, so the stories, do the stories have a theme to them, or are they all separate?
They're based on 4 different types of, there's one on a section on faith, a section on inspiration, and I've geared those stories to those particular larger topics.
Okay, and the goal setting,
What I did.
how did you rework that? Because I guess it's important for people to set goals.
Yeah. Oh, very important. However, when you set a goal, people get very nervous because you had to set a time frame for it and things that you needed to do or action steps. And that frustrates people a lot. So what I did is based on a technology called neurolinguistic programming, which is basically how people run their brains. If you can actually float into a picture of your accomplished goal, the wherewithal, the action steps, and the time frame seem to take care of themselves rather than you concentrating on them.
So are you saying that you're encouraging people to visualize where they want to be, and
Exactly.
that will lead them to?
But you'd have to visualize where you want to be in the 5 senses. What you would hear, what you would see, what you would smell, what you would feel, and what you would taste when you receive and when you have that goal. So you are immersed in it. And once you're immersed in the goal itself, then your unconscious mind has to find action steps, as opposed to you going, if I don't do it by next Tuesday, I'm a failure. And a lot of people think like that.
You were a teacher for a while, weren't you?
I was a teacher for 30 years.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right, so then that's pretty much like when teachers write learning objectives. It's
Yes.
always, there's a big goal to
Right.
reach something at the end of the year or at the end of
Right.
the unit, and then there's the tiny little baby steps to get there. And so baby steps are less intimidating.
Usually.
That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What was that, neuro-linguistic? What was that?
It's called neurolinguistic programming. It was discovered in 1976 by 2 gentlemen. And they found out that your eyes will move in certain directions as you start to access information from your brain. So you can actually tell how people think and how they run their own minds. Because your experience is not my experience. So if I want to talk to you, I would try and do it in a way that you would understand it, rather than the way that I think that you would understand it.
So that's probably what's wrong with the world, is we're all not understanding each other.
Well, we say you're wrong, and you're right. For the best example of it is when you look at an X-ray. I look at an X-ray and I see what's normal about it first, and then I'm looking for the abnormalities of it. I had an associate one time, and she would look and say, that's what's wrong with it, and everything else is perfect. And we would argue, but we're both saying the same exact thing. And once I understood that her model of the world, the way that she accessed information, was what was wrong first and then what was right, we got along famously, because I would just change the way I would look at it and say, that's our bad spot. And she would go, you're right, you're 100% right. And we got along very well that way. If I did not know that technology, we would have been at odds with one another, both saying yes to the same thing, but in a different way.
Okay, so let's take your faith theme in the book, for instance, right?
Right. I have certain things with faith. For example, I have one story where I just went into practice, and when I went into practice, you've heard the story. When I went into practice, I just went about doing it, but I knew that in order to practice, I had to look the part. If I'm a chiropractor, I did not want to be obese. I wanted to be in good physical shape.
Sure.
So I went to a gym, and during that time, this was the early 80s, and they had these big guys who were the gym owners, and they'd say, you want to look good? I said, sure, I want to look good. And this was between my office hours, morning and the afternoon. So he took me through an incredibly difficult routine, and my arms were shaking, and I decided, I took a shower, changed, and went back into the office, not realizing how vigorous the workout really was. Now, I had faith that I knew exactly what I was doing. However, when I saw this first patient, who was a very frail lady, I then adjusted her, and when I adjusted her, my arms collapsed, and my nose drove directly into her spine. And it's funny what people say, and she just looked up and she said, excuse me, doctor, is this a new type of technique? I said, yes, it is. It's the nasium technique. We smell where the subluxations are. So she, for whatever reason, bought that, but I had enough faith in myself, it's just one of the stories, that it would come out okay. So
Okay.
that was, but at the end, I added an exercise that what would you particularly do if you knew that you could not fail? That's a faith, the classic faith premise.
Okay, so if I was reading this book, and I wanted to become more goal-oriented, how would you help me? How would the book help me to become more goal-oriented?
What I did.
How do you set a goal?
What you're supposed to do is to set a goal that is right now more than you think you can do, but not out of sight.
Okay.
As a chiropractor, it would be setting a goal of I'd like to help X amount of people per week, and this is how I'm going to do it. So you set a premise. After you set a premise, then you want to know in what time you want to set this, what time you want to accomplish this. And then what I did is that you would go and you would literally sit down and envision what it would be like to be seeing the number of people that you wanted to see, helping those people, and then in time, how it was going to grow. So that's the way I set a goal, and then you go accomplish doing that goal. The whole idea of goal setting is to participate. Because if you aim for the sun and you only hit the moon, you accomplished something that you thought you never did anyway.
Suppose I'm a person who's floating. I don't really know what I want to do with my life. Is this book going to help me?
Yes, because there's a statement in it. What would you do if you knew you could not fail? And if you know you can't fail, you take away all of the outside areas that
I do that, but. I do that, but.
But, right. The 3 words that you should not use are but, no, and
can't. And can't.
And
right?
can't.
And can't.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you think you can't, you're
You
exactly right. You're going to reach that goal.
Definitely convince yourselves that you absolutely can't. Yeah.
Definitely.
I know. One of the sayings I like, which I probably can't say here, but I'll say it in an abbreviated form, is everything you say after but is BS.
That's true. That's true. What you can do if you're trying to be nice to somebody and show them that there might be a different way, instead of using but, use the word and. So what it does is it smooths over that transition from one sentence to the other.
Yeah, but is a very off-putting word.
Very much so.
Our
Very.
parents use that a lot.
Yes.
And so did we. Then we turned it on.
Oh, most definitely.
So what motivated you to write this book?
My mother. My mother was a writer on the New York Times. She was just an incredibly wonderful person. And she would literally, I'm an only child, so she would literally write everything that I did in high school. When I got to college, I wrote my first term paper because my mother had written. I did all the research, but she would put it into English. So terrible.
Tisk.
So I write my first term paper, and I had given it to my roommate who was an English major, and he made some minor changes. I get called into the professor's office, and this is 1964, and they were into affirmative action where they would take kids that didn't have the academic prowess that they were supposed to, but they elevated them to college. And he looked at me, he said, "Are you a functional illiterate?" And I said, "Well, no, sir, I don't think I am." He said, "This is the worst term paper I've ever seen in my entire life," because my mother had written everything. So by the end of the 4 years, I had learned how to write. And then years later, there was this little word that always went off my mother had, which was basically write like you talk.
Yeah.
I certainly do like to talk. So, and I thought I had something to say, so that's why I...
So did that work in the long run, writing like you talk?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it did?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was the type of person who had good thoughts, and I could tell a story. And if I could tell a story, I knew I could write a story.
Yeah, well, that's how I feel about my writing too, is I don't think of myself so much as a writer as I do a storyteller. I'm a good storyteller. Who's your audience?
I would like to address this book to older adolescents, kids that are anywhere from about 12 to 18, where they really don't know what they want to do. And then also skip a little bit into the people that are in their 30s and 40s who have tried certain things and found that that was not for them, or they didn't want to do it and didn't really know where to go. Some of these stories might address them, and then they could take the exercises at the end and see if they could change that particular situation that they were stuck on.
Resetting.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I do a career day in a couple of high schools on the island, and it's ninth graders. And of course, I really believe that in the ninth grade, you probably don't have a clear idea of what you want to do, but you should have a clear idea of your talents by then.
Yes.
And it's amazing. The attempt of the career day is to expose the kids to as many different careers as possible. And what I ask the kids to do is to visualize their work day. How do you want to spend your day when you're working? You're going to have to work. Everybody has to work unless you win the lottery, which is unlikely. And I go through, do you want to be inside or outside? Do you want to work with people or not with people? So, again, it's using all those senses.
Sure.
What do you envision an environment, a work environment, to be like? And that'll probably tell you what careers you absolutely can't deal with. At least you could get that far. Because it's mind-boggling how many different kinds of jobs you could have today.
Oh, absolutely.
And the kids, they use the internet, and the internet makes everything, as wonderful a research tool as it is, to me it makes things a bit confusing because there's so much.
It's
everything overload.
is super specialized. And I think that people need to have a little bit of this and have a little bit of this. I think that you need to be a little bit more well-rounded than just in one specific area.
I am a strong proponent of, after high school, you do some national service, because you're out with people, you're out in the world,
Right.
and you learn a lot about yourself. I think you really have to know yourself before you pick a career.
But that also takes a long amount of time to do that. Most young adults, when they enter college and really have no firm idea of what they're going to do. I think the statistic is something like 70% don't use the career that they were
Started out
started
with,
in.
sure. And careers in medicine, I mean, so many years of schooling.
Right.
And to learn when you are in the middle of your internship or residency that I really don't like this. Wow.
And there are a lot of physicians like that, a lot of physicians like that.
I think there's a lot of people in the wrong jobs. And resetting goals certainly is something that you could help people with.
I got into chiropractic as basically as a mistake, and found that it was my life's passion. Because the idea of helping somebody was always my passion, but the idea of being logical and telling somebody, being able to explain to somebody what was your problem, and also talking to people in a way that they understand. Perfect example of it is not to say that that's the cholecystectomy in room 210, but it's to say that's Mrs. Jones who happens to have a gallbladder problem and she's in room 10. It's just a different way to look at it. I wanted to do that, and that's why I leaned myself towards chiropractic than other types of the medical field.
Yeah, and I think the younger doctors have a tendency to be more down to earth with
Yes.
their patients and friendlier, and the doctors that I had, because I'm older, the doctors were older than I was, but they were very in their little
Stoic.
ivory towers, and yeah, they didn't really explain things as well as you would have liked them to do that. Why did you write the book in a story format?
Again, like
And
you,
exercises at the end.
well, you can tell something better if people are engaged within the story. There are a lot of different points, and you're a teacher, and we're both teachers, and you know that if you can make a story about the kidneys, for example, if you make it in some place it's a little bit funny, and some place it's a little bit where they really have to think, they will remember it because you can attach to different types of aspects of the story. Then what I did was take the story itself, and at the end add an exercise that if you wanted to, for example, on self-esteem, there are certain exercises that you should take for self-esteem.
How do you build self-esteem?
Building self-esteem is taking one thing at a time. I like to akin it to my son when he was about 4 or 5 years old, because he was into anything that Daddy wanted, obviously, and I was very goal-orientated at the time. He talked with a lisp at the time, and he says, "Dad, what should I do?" I said, "Well, let's set a goal for the day." He said, "Okay." I said, "Well, what do you do first?" He said, "Well, I brush my teeth." I said, "Okay, that's really good." So then what do you do? He said, "Well, Mom makes me breakfast." Okay. And then what do you do? He said, "Well, then I go to school for the whole day, Dad, the whole day." I said, "Okay." And then what do you do when you come home? He said, "Well, I usually like to play a little bit." I said, "That's good." He said, "Then I do my homework. Then we have dinner, and then I watch some TV, and then I brush my teeth again, because brushing my teeth is very good, and then I go to bed." Now, at the end of that, and we checked it off, we had a list, and we checked off each one of those.
That's a busy day.
It was a very busy day. And at the end of the day, he looked at me and says, "I really feel good about me." Now, that's a 4 or 5-year-old, and that's building self-esteem because he was able to accomplish certain things. And it's built very, very slowly, and it's built one step at a time. You can't go out and say, "I have great self-esteem," because that has to be built on, it's a feedback. Every type of positive thing that you get is a positive feedback, and that makes you just a little bit better.
Okay, makes sense. What was the most challenging part about writing this book?
I never wrote anything. I mean, I wrote a scientific paper when I was a senior in college,